Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode. I've brought back the original audio. Digital Twin Fan Club is back using the original Neil Thompson audio. I'm going to get some guests today. Got some exciting things to talk about. So today, the Digital Twin Fan Club podcast, we're going to talk about our weeks, as always. But we're also going to talk to Dan Roster about the latest digital twin standard, which would be really interesting. We might get a visit from Neil Thompson, who will just come in and break things like he does, which is, his
is Dan coming? I mean, is he in the ether? Like,
not worrying about production. He's made me a promise. He's gonna stick to it.
So just a heads up, Dan might not turn up. He might be lost. He might be in Wales.
Why be so negative? Why be so negative?
Because the crowd might be massively excited to hear from Dan rather than just me and you, and then Dan's busy,
right?
So let's all cross our fingers.
Okay, my fingers are crossed. So let's rock and roll. Digital twins. What's new?
Well, there was an event in Dubai, wasn't there?
There sure was.
So lots of twinny things. I think the new ISO was mentioned a lot by a few people, saying that I saw a lot of people saying, this ISO is really good. I'm not sure whether they'd read it or kind of used it.
Well, we've got Dan coming in. As I said, you should never have doubted him. He was expecting an Outlook invite from us, and he didn't get one. That's because this is now a regular recording slot, and we will just be here at this time every week. So that's the Safety Events one. I need to have a chat with Josefa, see how he's doing, see how he's getting on.
Is that coming back to London?
Yeah,
oh,
it
nice.
is. Yeah. So nice. Have a chat with him about that.
Nice. I think, it'd be good to see that come back. It did well. Good to see you on stage for 12 hours.
Yeah, I was run ragged at the end of that day. Really showed there's a lot of interest. I've been talking to a lot of event people recently, and it's really sharpened my focus on how digital twins operate in the marketplace. That sounds really wonky, so I'll rephrase that.
How to sell them to people? You mean? Sorry.
Well, no. As in, a bit of column A, but column B is I was talking to somebody who runs events, and they get 200 people at their events, but they only get senior leaders. Like they literally only get directors and above. So the audience is properly curated. So it's not massive. So they get smaller rooms, less people, but the people that are in the room are decision makers. And that kind of changes the topic, because I was saying, a lot of the events I speak at, it's awesome because they have such a broad audience, like Digital Construction Week, because you get this, broad remit, and you get policy questions like, how should we implement digital twin to enable the NHS to optimize its health outcomes? Next to, should I learn Amazon Web Services or should I learn Azure? Because such a broad range of people, and I can answer those questions to a certain degree. I'm not, not a complete expert, but I know enough to get myself in trouble, which is where I like to be.
It's tire kickers versus decision makers, isn't it? In a lot of ways. And I think it's so we've both now have event hats, which I think is quite weird, and you don't realize how complex the environment is when it comes to looking at things like, well, is it a trade show? Is it a conference? Is it educational? Who's your audience? Who are you going to target? How much is a ticket? What's the venue going to be like? How are you going to create it's just such a hard thing. I'd rather build something than organize events these days, because it's just herding cats. You need to be an official cat herder.
You do. But it's really interesting because it kind of you get a better understanding of the sector, I think, because it's like people that don't get a chance to work in a collaborative project team. That's what BIM and information management and digital has given me over the years, and is the opportunity to work in project teams where it's It's engineers, it's planners, it's designers, it's architects, it's also the community. It's like really, really diverse. And there are loads of people that just sit in their lane and they just, bash out a drawing and they don't really ever get to speak to people. They just keep getting these comments back that go, change this. Why?
Look at this. Are you going to get excited, Henry? We have a guest.
We have a guest. I'm going to finish my point.
He's currently backstage.
You can let him in while I finish my point, which is, we've had this diverse opportunity and you get that in events and it's really broad opportunity to meet loads of people. And now I'm going to do the best segue you've ever heard, which is a bit like standards, because in the way that events have very diverse people and you need to bring in their views and you need to accommodate them, etc., etc. The same could be said of standards, which now that you've kind of given the game away, Johnathan, I'd like to welcome to the stage, the virtual stage, Dan Rossiter. Hello.
Hello. How the devil are we both? You all right?
We are good. I'm saying that for me. I don't know about you, Johnathan.
Yeah, medium.
Okay.
No, I've listened to a few of these. I think medium is probably pretty good for you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this is Dan. You need to lie down now and get on. Henry and I are going to therapy you. I think that's the plan today, aren't we? We're going to.
I think the visual metaphors just got really weird.
Yeah,
come up on the stage. Now lie down.
Now lie down on the couch.
We have a virtual couch. Welcome. I'm going to put my hypnotism voice on.
It's very kind. So is it one of those psychology couches?
Yes. There's a spotlight on it. You can't see anybody else except us. Nobody is there. It's just this lovely red felt chaise longue that is covered in lovely pillows of your choice there. Silken. There's some of the green, some are red, and there's, a throw if you need one. You get yourself all comfy. And let's talk standards. I hear there's a new digital twin standard doing the rounds because Johnathan was saying my partner in crime, Hazefa, and the Dubai event, it was coming up a lot, the new ISO digital twin standard. So, yeah, what's happened? Just give us a brief update.
I can do. So, we publish lots of standards, as you can expect, and fairly recently, ISO 30173 was published, which is all about digital twin concepts and terminology. Now, before we dive into it too much, a couple of caveats I'll huck on there. The first is it's done by the IoT kind of an IT community, so it's not meant to be for a specific sector at all. So it does touch very high level on a bit of healthcare, bit of construction, bit of transport, bit of something, but it's intentionally not a deep dive in any of those spaces, but it's trying to sit there and go, you know what, we think this is what, or countries have come together, we've agreed this is what digital twin is and some of the key terminology. Do with that what you will, but it's not attempting to take over the space in any of those spaces. So we've talked before about some beautifully well-written standards like the manufacturing ones on digital twins, 23247.
Yes,
yeah, well done. Which John Iyer and others really like, and I think they're very good. So in theory, this can almost sit above it.
John Air, right, that you're talking about, of
sorry,
manufacturing catapult. Just to differentiate, because some people call you Johnathan.
I'm not John from the catapult. I'm not John on the catapult.
You are not. Very different.
I'm not on the catapult.
Both northern.
Both very northern. The fan club is quite northern, to be fair.
Yeah, it's got a good. We're actually international. We've got Oz, New Zealand, Canada soon.
The Americans.
Don't know, but we'll need to. Sorry, we took you anyway. Right. So 23247, like that. Carry on.
I'm now wondering, am I the only Celt?
Oh, you might be the only Welsh person.
Well, I assumed I was the only Welsh person. I was expanding it a bit broader.
Ian Gordon.
Oh, yes.
That's Celtic, right? Like Scottish. He's got the Scottish blood is strong in him.
Are you visually stereotyping, or he might have been 2 generations London.
Mm-hmm.
Need to find this out anyway. So,
but in essence, high level standard that covers a lot of bits in it, and I've been involved with this one slightly more than with others, and it's a very naughty thing, and this will start off well, is that I'm not meant to be involved with standards generally. As a BSI staffer, it gets it's a very unusual thing because we're meant to oversee the stuff, and I have to get special permission to sit on things, mostly because I'm awkward and want to sit there.
Yeah, but that was. I mean, I remember when you joined BSI, the British Standards Institution. That was really your selling point, was that you could do both sides of it, and I think that remains your selling point. You are out there engaging with industry, and you know what you're talking about.
Well, that's very kind of you. I'd agree with the engage with industry. Whether I know what I'm talking about, we'll let history decide that. But it's been a struggle because obviously how nascent these things are. And I know we've talked about this before in terms of the joys of definitions and the different angles people take on stuff. And parts of it, I won't say upset me. Parts of it didn't go the way I wanted, but isn't that how consensus works? It's that you pull the views of people, and the BSI definition is always quite interesting, which is a lack of sustained. I'm trying to remember the word that goes after sustained. We'll go for lack of sustained dispute for now, but there's probably a different word for it.
Okay, so effectively,
everyone stops arguing.
Consensus is effectively if people are quiet, we count that like good.
Yes. So yeah, as long as you give up the fight, the consensus has been achieved. It's one way of looking at it.
I mean, that's true, right?
Everyone just does a big deep breath and goes, oh, "That's fine." Yes, okay.
Yes, if you can live with it, that's not the same as agreeing to it. So I think there's wiggle in there, and I think that's where some of the bits come from. But I've recently written, it won't be out yet, I've written a blog post on the definition they use for digital twin, which I actually think is pretty good. And
where is that coming out?
Very good question. It's going to be coming out on, as I check my emails, I think it's one of those ones that might be BIM Today or PBC Today, or one of those sorts of
industry press stuff. Cool.
Yes. And we'll see what happens there. But generally, I like there are bits in it I really don't like, and there are bits of it I do quite like. And
let's talk about the bits you don't like.
I was going to say let's start with the bits you do like. Can we do a bit you do like, a bit you don't like, and a bit you do like?
Someone else has just appeared backstage as well.
Let's start with the webcam issue. Let this other man in. This is our zoo approach to podcasting. Very much feels like a zoo right now. Giving people that opportunity.
Is it a revolving door? If a guest comes in, do I go out now? How does it work?
No. Especially as we were just about to ask you the important questions about the digital twin standard. But this might be a good opportunity to introduce our latest attendee, the person who just come in a revolving door, but Dan wasn't caught in the revolving door. He was standing in the lobby with us. No, you're on stage, aren't you? Yes. Oh God, we've added. So we've got a stage.
I'm on the stage long, aren't I?
We've got a chaise long that you're on, and there's a revolving door here. This is turning into a fever dream. That is gonna drive me crazy.
I think Neil's. Do I say hello?
Oh, yeah, there he is. Oh, hello. Who's this?
It's ES Webcam Utility. You don't know who that is.
It is. To fix that, I'd have to plug everything back in again. So as long as you can hear me, and I'm clear, not crackly.
You sound great. Good. You sound great. Beautiful. Neil Thompson, everybody, the man, the myth, the legend, has arrived. You just joined us as we're about to go through the new digital twin standard with Dan and what he likes and doesn't like.
Ah,
how are you doing?
Go read it.
No, we've got Dan for that.
Oh, cool.
Do we? Dan looks askance at that. Still go get the standard. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, this is like we've covered that it's a bit of a broad brush overarching standard. So let's start with something you like, Dan. What do you like about the standard? What's the big thing you like?
I'll say the big thing I like is its definition for digital twin, and I won't be able to remember it verbatim, but it's along the lines of digital representation of target entities that uses data connections to enable convergence at an appropriate rate of synchronization. And super complex, but in essence, it's digital version of a thing you want to keep an eye on, and you use various data bits to align the two of them at some sort of frequency. So the fact is, I like the fact it doesn't use real time, which is great, and that rate of synchronization means it could be hourly, weekly, monthly, whatever. Data connection is vague enough that it doesn't say it has to go one way or t'other. So could it be physical informing digital, or digital informing physical in that sort of way? And I like the target entity bit, which is, we're not capturing the world, we're capturing the thing that's important to you or the thing that drives value. So I think for those reasons, I can get on board with it. And then it means things like the Met Office weather map meets my mental brain definition of what digital twin is, which I think ticks my life boxes.
Awesome. So do you want to ask the next question, Johnathan? I know you do. I can see your eyes.
Well, I was wondering if you're going to react to that definition, because I saw some good poker faces off Johnathan then.
Well,
I mean,
the challenge is that's kind of what it is, though, isn't it? Like, you could say it in 10 different ways, and as you said, it's like that makes sense as long as it gets rid of the confusion within industry of, is it a spinny thing, is it a model, is it a bloody BMS system? That's the main driver. In all honesty, like, doesn't necessarily mean everyone's going to listen to it.
Yeah,
I'm sure vendors will still be selling spinny things that are digital twins in the next 10 years and just annoying everybody. But
that's
to start somewhere.
It's to start somewhere, and I think the thing that, as Neil keeps changing his background, the thing that I think people need to remember is that standards, at the end of the day, except for things like the IT wiring regs, are voluntary. They are packets of convenience that are meant to help people do things. And ultimately, even if you read, and we're going to have a long discussion about this, you look at the building regs, and if you ask someone how many standards are cited in the building regs, the answer is one. It's the fact that there are 470 odd that are referenced in the non-obligatory guidance. So it's interesting that way out of what's easier to do. And I remember hearing a fun anecdote from someone, which was, say you want to design a staircase. Do you go around measuring people's legs, or do you buy the standard that tells you, based off research and ergonomics already, what the go-in and treads should be for a staircase? And the point is, they're meant to be more convenient than doing the work yourself.
Exactly, and they will have proven to be reliable. That's why you use them, right? So yeah, I'm on board with that. I specifically like convergence.
That's a great word,
and dislike it. I like it because it's true, as in you're talking about the digital model. By the way, I don't mean a static 3D model. I mean the model as in the whole thing, the entity, the digital model, and the physical model as in the real thing, the physical thing and the digital thing coming together. And like you say, it doesn't really specify what that means specifically. It kind of has a level of abstraction, which I like. But that's another reason that's the reason I don't like it, because it's not saying that it's, facilitating. It's not a way you would describe it to people who didn't know what they were, but it is accurate. It's, it's lost ease of reading and communication with regular human people for the benefit of it being accurate. So I'm ambivalent, like I am with most things. So
I'm getting close tonight. So one question, Dan. Obviously, I've not read it, so I don't know. The one mistake I think it would make is if it starts telling people how to deliver them to add value to their projects, because I don't think we're at that point yet. So does it actually go that far, or is it more kind of like overarching concepts and definitions?
Overarching concept and definitions is where it's at. And this is a really,
that's always positive.
It is, and I've drawn a graph somewhere, and I will provide the graph to you later for the show notes. If we do show notes,
yeah, nice.
But basically, in my world, you can split standards almost into three stages of the innovation cycle, where you've got that early stage, which is actually where you're trying to bring stakeholders together, and that's where you need to write vocab and terms and definitions and high-level concepts. And what you're doing, you're getting people to agree what the thing is. Later on, then you get to the point where you can start to agree the rules, go through concepts and specifications, code of practices. You can start to get to that value project bit you're talking about, and then later on you hit business as usual, where that's where you start to write guidance and that sort of stuff. And you can look at the BIM journey as sort of doing that, where everyone started with, what the chuff is BIM, then we wrote a bunch of rules and how it works, and now we're in that kind of NEMA guidance-y sort of space, as a rough kind of telemetry of the way the thing's gone. And
Autodesk's definition from their article yesterday that needs thrown under the bus, which I think we can happily throw under the bus on this podcast, of their 10D industry nightmare that they threw out yesterday.
Not the dimensions again. Like I said in my BIM Plus article, I fundamentally refuse to believe that money is a fundamental dimension of the universe. And that just grinds my scientific gears.
Hi, Neil.
Hi. Ian and I wrote a book that's yet to come out, but in that book we tackle the same subject and essentially come to the same conclusion, that the XD dimension marketing mechanism of that stuff is unhelpful, confuses things, and actually provides unhelpful clarification to the market to buy the appropriate outcome for the things that they need. So, if you want more on that information, you can buy the book. But
so Neil's opening his volley is shilling his book. That's like...
yeah, absolutely. But no, it's only because Henry was doing the same. Henry's in that corner.
I am in that corner. I'm gonna. Hey, buddy. One of the things I did say, and this is where this article came from, was that information in a physics sense might be the fifth dimension, which kind of covers all of the other dimensions that have been developed in BIM, which is price, time planning, even the fourth dimension, time planning, security, resilience, sustain, blah 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 blah. All of these.
Or we just don't. Please, just don't. But
it's not been proven. It's not been
proven. I have
proven.
a question to Dan, because this is like, I've had one of these weeks where it's been incredibly stressful because of
Autodesk.
So we've got digital twins, we
Yeah.
have information management, we have data management.
Yeah.
None of those, I'm assuming, I've not read the standard, but I'm assuming it doesn't reconcile the difference between data and information management. And actually, from an information management perspective, we perform pretty well as an industry, I would say, because I think the standards actually do a good job of setting up the protocols in which we transfer information. Meanwhile, trying to set up the data protocols for managing a budget between two JV partners that have completely different data structures in their timesheet systems all the way through to billing the client. ISO 9650 is never going to fix that. The digital twin of the organization that I'm trying to create from a data standards perspective is a bigger nightmare. So it's like one of my personal missions that I'm on is this opening up and bringing together convergence of data and information management has to happen to make digital twins work. It has to happen. Like, we can't do it. It's impossible to do it without it. And how are we going to do that?
So we have a visual method.
Depends what you mean by digital twins. But I have to head to the revolving door now, and head off stage.
You can answer that question, Dan, after the break. Thank you very much, Johnathan Monkley. Good to see you.
Speak soon, guys.
Love you.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by the Navigating Major Programs podcast with Riccardo Costantino, which I think is elevating the conversation around infrastructure and major projects. He talks to leading experts around the world to get edifying insights on a range of topics, from EDI to integrated project delivery and management to machine learning. Every episode systematically dismantles misconceptions with candid and real insights, because Riccardo is himself an expert, and so are his guests.
I really enjoyed the episode where special guest Jim Barnard, an expert in investment in major programs himself, turned the tables on Ricardo and asked him to explain the real benefits of collaborative contracts for public-private partnerships. Great episode. But there are loads of others, always with experts, always insightful. So check out Navigating Major Programs, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you, me. There we go. That is our sponsor for this podcast with the ad read, beautifully read by yours truly. Dan, the question that was asked before the break, the 1 minute break, because we've all forgotten what it was are these standards? I'll let Neil ask it, but can standards reconcile the difference between data and information management and digital twins?
Eventually, yes. I think they can. And it probably comes down to how willing they are to recognize the similarities between, or where things have been done and reinvented beforehand. And I'll chuck a few examples out because these are things I've pushed before, so I don't mind moaning about them. The first is, and it's slightly tangents, but I'll come back, which is procurement. Now, there's a beautiful international standard, ISO 22058, which is about construction procurement. In the back end of it, it has a big process diagram of the procurement lifecycle, which is 90% similar to the stages in 19650. So you can sit there and say, look, with a small tweak of how 19650 is presented, you can actually map it onto the international construction procurement cycle. And you can sit there and actually reframe it slightly as a procurement augment standard, in a way of, because really all it talks about is a lot of tender documents, and then it's about supply selection, and it's very procurement focused in its process. So you can start to move that there. The flip side is you look at standards like ISO 8000 Part 1 on data quality. It has an interesting diagram within it, which shows the relationship of different data quality elements. And you can look at that and you can see, well, that one looks like it's really the master information delivery plan. That one is kind of like exchange requirements or exchange information requirements. And you can sit there and go, actually, the data quality framework can be used, and probably 19650 resources can be mapped onto that. But the problem is it's been written by people who don't know each other. There's an old standard, I think it's ISO 11442. I'd have to double check that one, on document management, which basically has the common data environment workflow from 2008. It's near identical, done as an ISO, but by the people who do document management.
I'm looking at that now. So that is ISO 11442 is the technical product documentation, which sounds right.
Yes, that is I was right. And there's a diagram in that one, and you can see it has basically shared and published are fused together in their version, but it has private space, it has that kind of public space, it has an archive system record process in there, because it's just good document management. And actually, a lot of us have been swimming around the same spheres, but it's very hard unless you're a standards wonk like I am, who sits there and reads lots of these random obscure ones to actually realize they exist in a way. So discoverability is the biggest problem, to then realize that there is good content relating to what you're trying to write. Because if you're doing information management, why would you look up the phrase data quality or construction procurement? Because that's context, it's not the subject of what you're talking about. And why would they do it the other way? Like, why would they look at the BIM standards if they're doing work on sector agnostic data quality frameworks? But there's a lot to learn from each other. And I think the more that we can expose that, the more we can bring these things together.
So is the answer then to, I guess there's two directions this could be going, is basically one standard to rule them all effectively, or bring them together into the appropriate place. So maybe the oldest or the highest quality, the most prevalent, the most generalizable standard gets aligns everybody, or is it merely which is quite hierarchical, model, or would it be best collaborative, where there's just sharing and alignment on taxonomy, on the meaning of words, and bringing all that sort of thing together? How would we deal with that?
I mean, I've always liked the idea personally of one world, one standard. end in that way. And actually, as we move into the future and trying to make things machine interpretable and everything else, do we have to move away from giving away PDFs or shall I say XML documents that have been formatted into PDFs, as most of them are these days? And actually, could you stick it into a Wikidata style platform or something, and actually you start to connect these subjects together? But the problem will be that what do you do when there are standards that are on the same subject but done from the perspective of different audiences, and who gets to take precedent in that space? It'll be very difficult. And the one I enjoy finding quite a lot is that the terms verification and validation mean something different to the quality community as they do to the IT community.
Yes.
So who wins?
Yes. So, I'm so glad you said that, because I just had to Google something that's related to the point you just made. So, two things, right? So one is sort of culturally how standards are created. Generally, massive broad brush, but you would have some form of technical expert that goes through the ranks and works the way up to being some sort of senior leader from a standards perspective. So there's sort of the crystallization of quite a small community's set of knowledge, really, because it's a function of time provided to achieve it. And then, someone I empathize with regularly in my mind is Anne Camp and all the people that have been part of trying to bring together, orchestrate ISO 9650, what have you, like getting everyone and countries to agree with all that sort of stuff. Like, it's difficult. So you've got that sort of compromise and trade-off to eventually get a standard. So a standard isn't a pure crystallization of the learning. It's the stuff that happens in between that sort of just sort of detaches it from practice, and there is a gap. And that's kind of why consultancies and advisors and what have you exist, right? Because it feels there's a gap to fill, and you either employ your own people or get external people to do it. So there's that dynamic. On top of that, and to your IT framework, so TOGAF and ITIL, Information Technology Infrastructure Library, service desk type related standards, and things around services. So there's standards for, or frameworks for, managing technical things like data or information management processes. There's these things around structuring services, which is ITIL and what have you. And then there's things that sort of structure enterprise architecture, like TOGAF. I forget what TOGAF stands for.
It means the Open Group Architecture Framework.
There we go. We all know everything here. So, and those things are not perfectly implementable. They all sort of are manifestations of this crystallization of the trade-offs that we have in putting these things together. And I guess my point is to what Henry was saying about, can we just bring them all together, is sort of yes and no. Yes, and it would be great if there's a way of having a common thread with them, but no in the context of where they come from and how they're updated and maintained, because they're in different industrial contexts. So I think there's a sort of I'm just thinking of sort of the Apollo concept of the open body of knowledge. There's a body of knowledge that needs to be wrapped around these things to help them. So it's not about having influence over them, but it's about that body of knowledge that wraps around them that will change them as they go along. And how do we do that? That's sort of what goes on in my head anyway.
So yeah, that's like I think that's one of my observations going through kind of construction built environment projects into kind of the general research world. Is there a lot of people who want one standard to rule them all, and you can actually end up spending a lot of time trying to develop that. We're going to classify everything, and we're just going to use one classification system, and we're going to map them all together, and we're going to create this perfect system before we start. But we just spent loads of money on that, and the project people aren't happy, and we didn't look at our specific project. Oh dear. So it'd be great if we could have that. If there was some, I always think it would be hilarious. Star Trek never has this computer call Earth High Command, and it says, "I'm sorry, they are using Apple devices, and I am not compatible with that." Right, but that leads to the bit that I think is the opportunity, which is it's about connections. It's about those connections. That's why I think Bluetooth works. That's the standard I always come back to, because it doesn't tell you what's in it. It is the handshake. It is the communication protocol. It is the stuff that you can take off the table to go and do these things. And I think that's going to be the real area of most improvement by trying to align these things, is how do they all connect? How do all these sectors connect? How do these standards connect? And how do we create that awareness?
But it goes back to that voluntary convenience bit as well. So one of my a really good one is USB-C, in a very similar sort of way, is a standard. And whether you've watched what's happened with some interesting EU reg law aspects, I think there's a requirement on, and I'll have to double check it afterwards, I think there's a requirement on new IT devices sold in Europe to use USB-C as its charge port, which has resulted in Apple now having to basically decide if it wants to sell Apple devices in Europe to put USB-C charge points on them. So you've got a voluntary standard which has then been cited in European legislation, which then impacted on the way the private firm have worked. But you can flip it around and say, well, they don't have to sell into Europe. It's their choice to sell into Europe, and that standard's been cited as the convenience to allow them to do that in a way. But I could stick any charge point on anything, but I find it fantastic that my laptop, my phone, my two different sets of wireless headphones, the gym one and my normal one, and my Nintendo Switch all use USB-C. We'll ignore the voltage and whether everything is a bit warm if I use my laptop charger on my phone, but the connection is consistent and it adds that value. So I think I agree with you, Henry, that it helps connect things together. And of course, as to Neil's point, the consultancy bit is needed because the standards don't give you the solution. They give you the parameters and the characteristics for a solution, because otherwise it's going to start dictating market activity, and there needs to be fair competition in markets. You can't turn around and write a ladder standard that says, only ladders from company X count as good ladders, so that you have to have that freedom in there to inform what the choices are. And only while I'm thinking about it, when you started talking about that idea of constantly refining at the start of the project, the thing that immediately came to my mind was, if you ever watch Red Dwarf, Rimmer working on his revision timetable.
That's all he does.
Well, yeah, it was a perfect timetable, but then he only had 10 minutes left, I think, to revise.
Exactly. But I think that ladder standard is standardizing ladders is a good analogy, because if then somebody tries to sell you a trampoline as a ladder, they wouldn't be able to do that. And that's certainly been, from the people that I've spoken to around digital twins and data management and information management, the thing they do want to know is this a ladder? Is this a ladder? Am I getting a digital twin, or is this a trampoline, or is this a golf club? What is this? Because it's those are very discrete things that human beings can identify, whereas a digital twin is an amalgamation of lots of things. So you kind of need that protection. Almost, you're protecting the marketplace by coming up with definitions.
Well, and that boomerangs us back to the international standard, because that's what it's trying to do, is try to set out, hey, this is what this standard is saying a digital twin is, and these are some of the key concepts or principles that relate to what a good digital twin can look like. And I will save this episode for talking about the fact they chose the abbreviation DTW for digital twin. But the definition is fairly sound, and hopefully it'll help move the conversation forwards, because then, like you say, we can focus on what it is. And interestingly, talking to people at the National Digital Twin Program, what they're interested in now is what are the standards, frameworks, and tools that support the principles they've set out for what a good digital twin looks like. And this idea, it needs to be adaptable, resilient, secure, and those sorts of things. So what are the standards that govern what does secure, interoperable, resilient look like? So that someone can say, what, I want a digital twin, but I want it to be these things, so please can you conform to these standards to give me confidence that it has those characteristics and is also a digital twin.
banging.
I'm enjoying Neil's face there, where
I was just going to jump in, but Neil had
Then I
his.
saw you, and I was like, Henry's going to say something, so I'm not going to say something. So I was going to say in response to that, it's interesting, isn't it, when that comes from the frame of suppliers not behaving, right? The only reason that conversation exists is because in the marketplace, it's not functioning properly. It's people turn up and don't provide what's required, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
If people turned up and got given what they wanted, the need for a standard wouldn't arise, right? I know this is a really silly example.
Are we swinging back to procurement again? Because
no, it's not procurement.
What you asked for, but it turns out what you asked for was the wrong thing.
No. I just think it's interesting in the sense of, like, you know, the famous BSI example of the railway gauges.
Yeah.
That was a load of manufacturers making gauges, and they all made it's sort of, if I wonder in a hypothetical world if they accidentally all made the right size gauge, what would have happened to the rest of history, if you get what I mean. So there's
podcast waiting to be written.
So, for example, this might be a bit of a weird example. It's only because it's on the top of my mind, because it's a problem that I've just finished dealing with this week, is time booking on a project. You know, there are people that overbook and underbook, and it causes budget problems, and it's a bit of a headache. And because of the lag in the system, you don't know there's an actual problem until it's basically too late. Once you've got invoicing cycles with the client, with the information, for the time that the information gets to you, you're kind of stuffed. You've had to book a over or underbooking to the client. And as you know, with some clients, overbooking's great or underbooking's bad, and it's all a bit weird. Anyway, from my perspective, and what I've been scratching my head over the past couple of days is, well, how do you, instead of trying to make sort of behavioural mechanisms that are dealing with it when it's gone wrong, how do you look at the problem at the front end so things are just booked correctly in the first place, and what can you do about that? So, for my context, I'm trying to pull together timesheet systems from different companies. So and they're all different, and they all behave differently. Some are corporations and have very strict requirements around timesheets, and you get loads of data, and it's all very neat and tidy, through to companies that have complete relaxed systems. Anyone can book anything to any code anytime, and you have to unpick it. So I guess it's more of those like input behaviors is instead of trying to police the middle bit, how do you police the front end, as even before procurement? And is there I don't know, it's more of like a thought experiment of how would you have a standards regime that deals with it more proactively than having to go down this road of, the only reason we know the standard exists because we've had loads of problems, and it's more of how do you standardize against the problem, not standardize against the proactive solution. That's an interesting world. It's back to organic connections and the Bluetooth thing, right? Is there another way of looking at the implementation of standards that can help us be more proactive? Asking that very simple question.
That's right. It reminds me a little of because for whatever reason, it seems to be I always have to rewrite the history of BIM every 2-3 months for someone in BSI, and what I ended up then rereading the bits in the 2010 BIS strategy, where it talks interestingly about the idea of the push-pull elements in the strategy itself, and it reminds me a bit of that, where what they talked about was we got to do the push element, which is how do we make it easier effectively for the supply chain to do these things, and the push element was give people training, give people standards in the form of guidance so they know the direction they should be taking, and speak to the software vendors to make it more easy to do. And then the pull version was then when you procure projects, you tell them you've got to hit this benchmark. And so you end up with the two sides then of one, which is the proactive bit, which is look at all this training, all these resources, and all this discovery you can do to do your solutions better. And then the pull, which is, and by the way, if you don't do it, you haven't got access to 1/3 of public works, hypothetically, because there's a mandate for it. And I think that part of it is discovery and mindset, because in theory, as a chartered architectural technologist, I could start my own architectural practice, and I'd sit there. And if I then started to think of, right, how am I going to set up a a timesheet system, my head would immediately go and I have a quick look, see if there are other standards on how you do timesheeting. Because I swim in all this all the time. First thing I do is going to look for an industry good practice. And I think the issue might be that when things are being set up, people set things up that work for them. They don't set things up that work for public good in that kind of phraseology, to actually get the benefits later. And the slight weird left field version of this is drawing standards. There's a beautiful national standard, BS 8888, that covered almost all the rules for engineering drawing standards. And I had a really good conversation with someone once that it would actually reduce the amount of training time you give new staffers if it was taught in universities and it was the way that companies did things. Because instead of learning the Arup way of drafting and then the ACOM way of drafting and then the Atkins Real way of drafting, it was all the same process, meant you were already pre-taught when you left university, and your utilization becomes quicker, faster in the business because you only had to learn about their timesheet system. You've not had to learn how to do their, line weights and symbols. And
you made a good point there in terms of, I want to find out a standard for my timesheet system. I go onto the BSI website to look up timesheet. It's almost I could just imagine like a little chat bot in the corner of the BSI website that instead of Mr. Clippy, it's a little sort of cartoon Dan that goes, I see that you're searching standards for timesheet systems. Like maybe you mean you want to work out how you manage your information, and actually there's broader. There's like this hierarchy, the specificity of the standards, and sometimes jumping into how I standardize my timesheet system. That the timesheet system could have been a standard that was set up by a load of lawyers, and the information management standards have been set up by information managers in the built environment. The document control one that you mentioned, I imagine, are document controllers from where? What industry? Probably not construction, maybe more manufacturing, maybe.
It's probably more that in a kind of manufacturing, engineering, drawing practice, kind of draftsman kind of aspect.
There's this sort of.
I want to kind of.
Go on. Sorry.
One is I would have thought, and I just did a quick check, and I was right. ISO 9001, the classic, the quality management standards. Just there it is. There, I suspect that would be it, but that doesn't tell you how to do it. Still doesn't tell you how to do it, but it does tell you how the process should look, right? Which is interesting. But then it also kind of brings on to, and I'm going to keep banging on about this, the muesli effect, which is for micro companies, for small companies that don't have the time, and maybe they do employ somebody every now and again, or they subcontract, or they do bring somebody on board. These are decisions that do not deserve the sort of time that gets given to them in either a large organization of 50,000 people or a large project / program environment of 18 companies and 300,000 people, and so I think that's a really interesting thing I'd like to kind of tackle with this. How is this going to help this approach and kind of putting timesheets over there with digital twins? How can having a standardized approach help micro and small organizations just get it right first time?
So my favorite experience is a dear friend of mine. I don't know if I name him or not because of the story I'm about to tell, but you've met him before, Henry. Runs a very small consultancy that essentially helps people through certification processes and helps with their audits. And when sort of BIM first emerged as a thing, that he started to get his clients ring him. And then I say his clients, these are like 1 or 2 man band type organizations around Essex, starting to get inquiries about, I need to get my BIM stuff sorted. And I came along to a couple of meetings, and I say a couple, there's about 5, and 4 out of the 5 of them, they all did exactly the same thing. And I thought it was really interesting was we sat down in this sort of office with like 8 lever arch files everywhere. And the conversation was basically like, BIM's this new lever arch file that I need to have next to my health and safety file, my ISO. So these are business management systems that are deployed in lever arch files on a shelf. They're not like on a intranet or on someone's computer. They're all of them. And this wasn't that long ago. Lever arch file things, right? Then when the auditor comes in, I get you're auditing ISO 9001. Okay, here's my ISO 9001 lever arch file that I want. And he wanted his BIM one. He goes, I want my BIM lever arch file. I'm hoping it's gone bit further than that, but it's I think down in that part of the supply chain, it's for me to get onto that framework, I need to tick these boxes, and what is the bare minimum that I can do to tick that box? Because these people just want to focus on doing a good job. They don't necessarily worry so much about the bureaucracy, but there's some necessity for it because the supply chain sometimes demands it.
Yeah, and it is a problem.
It creates so much waste.
It does. And you think of how multi-talented these people have to be as well, because that the in those smaller businesses, the person responsible for probably bringing big clients in is also the person who does the timesheets, is also the person who probably does the permits for the building, is also the person who looks after the insurance. So it's how you make it easier for them. And we've started playing with using things like large language models for standards. I know we haven't got the time to talk through it properly, but the problem we're trying to look at internally is how do you stop the hallucinations in part of it, and how do you put a confidence factor on it so it can actually say, I don't know? Because it's very good at giving an answer, which could be a wrong answer, but how do you get it to come back and say, you know what, you've asked that question, I don't have enough information to answer that. And that's probably the exciting place to get to, is when you can make sure that it only gives that confident answers. But we'll see how that goes.
And yeah, I think it's really touching on some important things, all of that, because ultimately, as I'm investigating this for construction apprenticeships, why aren't micro companies taking on people? And they're very busy with things, and they often they only see the lever arch file, and they might not see the value. So there is a need for standards to create this, this common practice, but they're often quite opaque. So you do need somebody to help you translate into the real world. And that can be done in a way that does improve how they operate. It does improve their business. And often they're seen as separate things. And I think it's connection again. We're back to connection. How do we connect this standard that we know is valuable, whether it's on quality management, whether it's on digital twins, whether it's on information management, to your practice? How do we make that work? And that is, like you say, it's the work of a consultant, or it's their work, and they will just have to take the time, because you want people who won't kill themselves or other people on construction sites. Fundamentally, you don't want people to die. So there is a need there. Always going back to that sort of standard where there's a clear benefit to doing this. There's loads of clear benefits to these other standards. We might need to rebrand to the DTWFC, Digital Twin Club, as a result of this standard, for example. And maybe that's a small price to pay. So let's not kill each other on site. Let's not kill ourselves. Let's not kill the public. It always comes down to that, because that's one everybody can relate to. If your business is killing people, that's bad. Don't do that. And it turns out that a lot of those things have been solved. And in the same way, if you're mis-selling products, that's bad. Don't do that. We have a standardized way of doing that. So I think that's going to be my summary. Do you have any parting words, y'all, on either time management, time booking, or digital twin standards?
I mean, one very quick one from me will be, and it probably reflects on Neil's point from earlier. There's an old saying which was, every sign tells a story. So when you see, do not lick electric fence, someone's licked that fence. And I'm wondering, actually, maybe I should start saying every standard tells a story, because in theory, it's come from a need in that way. But I think it's a very good point that I'm going to think some more on.
Cool. Awesome. Do not lick that digital twin. Is that the podcast title? I think it might be. Neil, any last thoughts from you?
No. Aren't we lucky that we got Dan?
Aren't we? Thank you, Dan. Thanks for coming. Dan Rossiter from the British Standards Institution, everybody, and Neil Thompson from Atkins Realis, and myself, Henry Femi Taylor from Athenaphilia. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Ta-ra.